Hi, everybody. Hello. Nice to see all your shining faces. So this is accompanied by a little bit of work. We're all still at work. So please just pass these around, distribute them. We're going to be working on those when we break out into groups. So there are 12, 13 of you. That'll probably be like, say, 4 groups of 3, 1 group of 4. Just in case you want to start thinking about whom you want to sit next to. And without further ado, per the name of the packet, this is the language of literacy. So, sorry to whoever teaches in this room. So everybody's read the packet, yes? Or do I have to give unprepared demerits? Always open with a joke. So, in case you didn't feel like you didn't have a real strong handle on it, I've got a little bit of sort of an overview. First thing in there is the simple view of reading. So, I'm the reading specialist here, and this is the easiest way into really thinking critically about literacy for our kids, where they struggle, where they have relative strengths, and what do the combinations mean. So this is like a coordinate plot. So on the x-axis, what do you have, Jeff?
Word recognition.
So word recognition processes. Now, Danny, is that like a surface skill, or is that sort of higher level thinking?
I would say
Take a guess.
relatively surface level.
Very surface level. So that's reading accuracy, reading rate. Just sort of like, if you've ever dealt with the MCAS alt, it might sort of fall under access skills. And then the y-axis, because it's vertical, this is where we're all trying to get to. This is sort of like the finish line. Like where we want all our kids to get is to be good comprehenders, regardless. So language comprehension processes, those are all the high-level skills. Now, the simple view of reading, it's mostly about receptive skills when it comes to written language. It's reading and understanding what you read. We're going to go beyond that in a little bit. But, so, just like any coordinate plot, plus plus, negative plus, negative negative, and negative plus. Wait, no, plus negative.
No.
Right? Thank you. That's right. I attended a few 8th grade math classes last year. So, fluency and comprehension. Reading fluency is accuracy and rate, but also prosody. Now, who can give me like a basic definition of what prosody is? So there's melody, which refers to music. Brian, you look like you're about to say something.
I would say just reading it the way it should be read, kind of reading it fluidly.
And finding the right breaks for pauses, using punctuation. Yes, sounding like you understand what it means. So when you wind up over here, and is that quadrant 2?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When you have sort of those surface level reading skills are low, but your comprehension is high. Anybody know like what sort of diagnosis or category this might be?
Like an SLD in decoding.
An SLD in decoding, yes, or even more technical, dyslexia.
Yeah.
So like you might have a kid with really high sort of intelligence, maybe does really well in math or science, but has struggles with reading accurately and at a rate that it should. It's easy to identify these kids who have low comprehension and also have struggled to just get the words out when they're reading. And then these are really subtle. We don't get many of these, but we do have some here, where they're very good at those surface skills, but it's like they're just not putting the pieces together. So, to make this really come alive, take a second, read the 2 brief paragraphs up here. So now you're going to hear a recording of a student reading this passage. I said you're going to hear a recording of a student reading this passage.
Also, those movies are not worth watching at a time, then the scene stopped and the character began talking. You tempted to fall asleep. The scenes as well written, as badly awesome written, and the actors are stiffy and ready to they're poorly, and it's a total mess. The film is never explained how they hear about their powers and wander on one place to another. And add that this in the movie is way too long.
So some people obviously know who this is by the head nods and the putting your face in your hands. So just those of you who don't know who this is, just hearing him read, what do you think? What do you think? How's he going to do with answering questions on this?
Well, he's passionate.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is that he's filling in the blanks in some cases, but there was a couple of times where whatever he said wasn't what he read, but it kind of connected. You know what I mean? Like he was just blowing past a bunch of words and then synthesizing in a unique way. But I mean, I'm telling you, there was at least twice that he read something different out loud, but he kind of, you kind of got the gist of what it was saying.
He sort of like listening to how expressive he is.
Yeah.
Kind of, gives you hints at that.
I would be surprised at the comprehension if it's that fragmented and jumpy and gaps in certain areas and additions in others. I would be concerned that would be.
So are you ready to be surprised?
Yes, please.
Saying good. So some of these are pretty, they're pretty meta-linguistic questions. So like, really sort of analyzing the language aspects of this. What kind of text is this? A film review. What did the writer enjoy most about the movie? This, not in the section I put up there. The effects, detail. Which sentence from the passage best states the main idea? A craft question. Well, also sort of analyzing. You would be better off avoiding extreme action heroes. And then getting the tone. Disappointed. Not necessarily obvious. Now, I hope you guys are interested in hearing this. This kid reads a little bit more slowly, so you should be able to kind of follow along as it plays. Nope, go back. Give the punchline away.
Jamal was nervous. He was about to play his guitar in the school talent show. There were lots of people watching. Jamal could see them through the curtain. He felt his stomach churning like a washing machine. Amanda saw the look on Jamal's face and patted his arm. "Don't worry," she said. "You'll be fine." Jamal smiled. He felt a bit better. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage.
So, some observations. Some of you guys in the back. Does it sound, yes, Shamir? You did that thing, like you were thinking.
Oh yeah, I was in thought.
Yeah. Well, does it sound like he understands?
It sounded like he understood.
So, the fluency, like, he doesn't read very quickly, but he's accurate, 100% here. Also, the way that he breaks up the phrases is very clear. Even when he gets to these character voice, these quotations, he pitches his voice up like he's taking on the character. But, as I gave it away,
There's no comprehension.
no comprehension. Not putting this together whatsoever.
So, because there's no comprehension, that means he's not retaining anything he's reading. He's just reading it.
It's more than about retention, because this kid will retain lots of surface level details, but he cannot tell you why Jamal is nervous. He's feeling sick to his stomach. So not connecting that with the idea of going on stage to perform at all. What makes him feel better? He takes a deep breath. forgetting the relationship between the two characters. What does the phrase, his stomach churning like a washing machine, tell you about how Jamal is feeling? He's happy. And why does Amanda talk to Jamal? She wants to hear him play the guitar. So not observing his state of emotion. So this is kind of like, if you get to pinpoint what this diagnosis is, this is probably the most telling one, that he doesn't interpret that metaphor at all. So this student, well, I don't want to say because his re-eval's coming up.
Is there something to be said about the context of the reading or the exercise itself? I mean, could there be a discrepancy? Well, I mean, what I'm saying is that you ask him to answer questions after he reads it aloud to you in almost like a testing circumstance. Then you have him sit down and read it by himself and answer a series of maybe the same questions. Would he answer it different? Like maybe the pressure of reading it out loud is a thing?
He feels no pressure when it comes to reading
Okay.
out loud.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
me. It's just me.
No, I mean, there's really valid questions.
Yeah, I'm curious about
You
that.
know, like sort of performance anxiety, like it factors into a lot of kids' performance on many things. So, some of you might be, this print's probably a little small. The big question, how do we get from recognizing a student's basic reader profile, based on the simple view of reading, to designing the most effective and efficient kind of instruction, intervention, and or treatment? The big answer? We need to ask a few more questions. So, if you've gone through the packet and seen this, don't panic. So breaking this down, this is the hook chart on kind of like the second content page. The top of the chart, all these things go together. These are those surface level skills. So like word recognition, but now we're bringing into this writing and sort of expressive language. So word identification, like word recognition processes, pairs with spelling. So spelling is kind of like the expressive side. Decoding is the receptive side here. Orthographic processing. What does that mean?
Identifying like letters.
Identifying letters. It's spelling. It's the visual side of written language. It's like, can you recognize the symbol and tell, and be able to at least think of what it is. Phonological processing, a fellow speech language pathologist, what is phonological processing?
Being able to use and understand sounds.
Being able to use and understand sounds, and especially the sounds of language, and to be able to manipulate that information. So putting those two things together, visual symbols, sort of abstract, and sort of cementing them to these sounds of language, is orthographic phonological association. So think of that as the top of the chart as your surface level skills. Now getting down to the bottom. Like I said, this is the finish line. This is where we're trying to get all of our students to. We want them to understand what's coming at them, and we want them to be able to express their understanding in ways that they can reference back to. So these components, morphology, syntax, semantics, discourse, pragmatics. Anybody feel like they've got 100% solidity on what those terms mean? I have good days and bad when it comes to really being able to wrap my mind around these. So we're going to work together to make that as live as possible. So, level up, bottom level. Now the two things that go between them, automaticity is sort of like word recognition when it comes to that. Do you have to slow down and decode a word that you don't, that may have like a lot of syllables? Or can you recognize it instantly on sight? You recognize it instantly, that's automatic processing. And here, fluency is kind of like the expressive side of how easily can you get from one to the other. and vice versa. So fluency, like when we talk about learning a second language, you kind of judge somebody's fluency generally by how they speak that language, not necessarily about comprehension. And when it comes to writing, of course, it's like how easily, how quickly, fluidly can you produce writing. So two-way bridge. Now, phonological processing, well, these aside, if we're thinking of this as sort of like, getting the writing out, producing it, or like speaking, we're trying to get down here. That's sort of like it's the down slide. This is the way here, and then on the other side, comprehension, sort of like receiving information and understanding it. It requires sort of being able to read, being able to access the information that's coming at you. Over here, attention, executive function, memory, these are sort of like, they're underlying abilities. Like, can you hold your focus on something? Can you plan a task ahead? Also, executive functioning, are you making connections between what you're reading at the moment and what you've already read? And then memory, so background knowledge, vocabulary, sort of like you need things here in order to be able to, for the new information to be sticky, for it to really land and for you to be able to remember it. So affects both. And then on the other side, oral motor is speech, and visual motor is producing things in symbolic form, whether it's handwriting or typing. And it's just a simpler version. It's also in the packet. Surface level up top, higher level thinking at the bottom. Automaticity and fluency. This is how easy can you get from one level to another. Two-way street. Mental self-control. Physical factors over there. Simple. Kind of just sort of like helps you wrap your brain around it. Kind of like think of it generally like this, in these ways, and then sort of zoom in and try to see the details. Here's the real thing again. So it's not necessarily as hard to break down as it initially looks like. But literacy is a whole language system skill. It's not really a set of skills. It's how do you interact with and process everything you know about language. Again, we got perceptive side over here, listening and reading, and expressive side over there, speaking and writing. So some of these terms, they're a little bit complex. Maybe you haven't seen some of these words before. So let's just pick them apart a little bit. Like we already said, orthographic processing, letters, recognizing things on sight, or putting it into writing. Phonological processing, can you perceive and recognize all the sounds of the language? And can you speak it? Or can you attach all these things together? Orthographic and phonological association. So every single one of these things affects the rest. Morphology. Now we're getting into the bottom of the chart. Again, this is most important, where we're all trying to get to. If you have a question, you want me to slow down at any point, please just let me know. So morphology changes in word form. You have a root word, maybe, and then you start adding pieces on it. Jada, when do you think kids start learning morphology? Like when do you think they start making these additions and changes to words?
I feel like when they're younger.
About
right?
two-
Like, do you understand the relationships and differences? Like, little kids pick up shapes and they know what type of shape it was, and like at some point they figure out like, or like what certain things to do. So maybe like when they're toddlers, I feel like.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, like 2 years old. Usually the first thing that a kid picks up on is plural S. Sort of like, here's one famous test called the WUG test. There's a big research study. I can go in, I can nerd out on that if you want later. But here's one WUG, and now here are two. See if the kid fills in the blank with WUGs, or if they just say WUG again. And that tells you something about their development. Syntax is more than grammar. It's just like, how do you put words together to sort of like form a big idea? The word sentence comes from the Latin sententia, which is thought or emotion. So, my name is Tarzan, and yours is, I presume, Jane. A lot of thoughts in there, and it sort of like holds together very well. Me, Tarzan, you, Jane. He probably has some work to do. We understand what he's saying. And Tarzan, Jane, me, you. Totally out of order, and very hard to understand if you have no reference point. Semantics. This is a word that gets thrown around a lot, usually to when people are being dismissive, saying like, "Oh, that's just semantics." But no, nothing is just semantics. It's like how solid is the concept behind a word in your mind. So there's a joke here. For a snack, I ate an apple. It's not the same as for a snack, I ate a computer. So, some kids who've never eaten an apple might think you're talking about a computer. Pragmatics is like, like, are you playing by the rules when it comes to the way you use language? Like, are you, conventions of language use is another really good way of thinking of pragmatics. Like, what are the expectations when it comes to grammar? So if like a syntax is sort of like how do you compose a thought, pragmatics contains things like grammar. Also applies to social rules of interaction, what's appropriate. Sort of like, it's where you start getting into what is agreed upon by larger society. So my heart tells me that does not belong in like an analytical essay, but there probably is a place for it. And in discourse, this is kind of like the finish line of the finish lines. This is something like the ability to process irony and sarcasm in writing. When you don't have tone of voice to go along with it, you really have to there's a lot of inferences going in there and metaphors, because you have to be interacting back and forth with the information. When you're reading, that means that you're sort of like, that's where you're actively using your background knowledge to understand what's coming at you. Even when you're reading, it's still a dialogue. You have to create things in your head. And then writing, it's sort of, can you do that sort of higher level synthesis? And are you thinking about your audience? That's very much discourse. So now that we've gotten through that, let's break up into threes. Should we count off, or you guys feel like you can do it on your own?
Probably do it. Probably do it on our own.
Okay. All right.
Where are all of those?
Groups of three. I think that's a good way. And then I'm going to circle around. So I'm going to put the chart up on the screen here, so you can reference that. But you also have it in your packet. And your job is to let's see, how much time do we have, Monique?
30.
30 more minutes?
Sorry, till 4:30.
Till 4:30? Oh,
I believe, let me double check
Great.
that.
doing fine.
I believe.
Let's take like 10 minutes. And so with your group, you're going to look through these samples So let's see, how many groups do we have? 4. Okay, so one group, I want to take the first sample. Can you guys take the first sample?
You got it, Dylan.
Page 1, thank you. Number 2. Number 3 is group 4. Did you guys actually, because we have 5 samples in there, can you take like 3 and 4? Yeah, just 3 and 4. We can divide on problems.
We're supposed to read different page.
Not all of them.
Oh, you can read through them if you want, but it's just, we have like 10 minutes.
So do you
It
want
might
us
help
to
to
do
sort of
3 and maybe
zero
do
in.
4?
For A. That's great, thank you.
I think you're like,
You guys-
you're like,
Okay.
which one is this?
Good inference right there.
Are you guys taking 4 or 3?
Which one do you want to read?
We can do 4 now.
So it might help you, well, read them through first, but even as you're reading it through, you might sort of circle the obvious mistakes, the sort of surface level stuff. And then when you start talking to each other,
This one? Yeah, it's another.
it might pop in your mind.
Yeah. What is it? One of the 5? Top? One of the 5?
No. No longer goes to square.
Oh. Recent departure? Or was it a couple years ago?
He didn't return after 8th grade.
When did he leave?
I met him in 7th.